Admonition the 24th. Secure your property. In tribute to the original Watergate scandal, phantom WMDs and sexed-up dossiers were christened by the British press as Iraqgate in the noughties, and eventually that did for Tony Blair. And then, with the revelation of a very real, very famous nipple during half-time at the Super Bowl, the press imaginatively reused the idea to create the portmanteau Nipplegate. But that was very much a reach because, aside from the sensibilities of a few maiden aunts in the Midwest, I am not sure that was an actual scandal. And more recently, within the attention span of all those vituperative new media types, the act of drinking wine on a terrace during lockdown at a very famous address in London became Partygate. And that was a very definite scandal, which did for a certain mop-haired adult. In our case, for Dunans, we had the definitive gate. And while you may not have been aware of it at the time, it definitely eventually did for one of the principals in the action. This was a gate to end all gates. We called it the Gate. This was ferocious and very persistent gate, an alligate or. It began even before we took possession of Dunans. In our naivety, Sadie and I decided in the autumn of 2002, while we were still negotiating the purchase of Dunans and its 16 acres, that a gate was in order. We'd heard those pub rumours of architectural salvage, of fireplaces going missing, of lead being swiped, and with the owners at the time, the vendors, we agreed that erecting a gate was indeed a good idea. It has to be said that they were resistant at first, but they eventually conceded that they were also aware of unauthorised visits. I also think they were very wary of being disagreeable with us. After all, they had already lost one buyer. So, a gate installation was commissioned, and Grego, the vendor's go-to handyman, was instructed. This was not to be a special gate, mind, just a gate. A metal 5-bar gate with diagonal cross braces, a spring-activated latch, and wooden gateposts. A common or garden gate. The sort of gate that is to be found in every corner of the land, giving entrance to field, yard, house, drive, and woodland. A gate which says, do not enter here on a whim, because to go further requires you to get out of the car and open the gate. By opening the gate, you are implicitly saying you have a right to do this, by permission of the owner of the gate, and of the land the gate lets onto. Indeed, if the gate carries any signage, then by opening that gate, you are implicitly agreeing to the terms of those signs. That sort of gate. Now, bearing in mind that the gate in question would be placed across the drive to a castle, one might argue that a more prestigious sort of gate might be installed, a gate with more implicit and explicit value. A cast-iron gate, for example, or a double gate, or an electric one, with brass finials. Something which speaks to the status of the building behind. We thought, in our distant fastness down south, that the choice of an porteur ordinaire might elicit negative comments from locals, neighbours, deliverers and visitors alike, given the listed status of 3 of the structures behind this new hinged barrier. But no. Planners, delivery drivers, visitors, locals, etc. minded not a jot that we'd emplaced this visual and actual barrier to entry at the drive-head. In fact, I think many who held the bridge as the acme of rubber-built architectural achievement in Argyll breathed a sigh of relief. No more would the bridge be crossed willy-nilly by the curious, the suspicious, or the vexatious. It would be protected a little. The fewer gross tons that crossed Telford's pièce de résistance, the better. However, it became apparent once we were on site that a certain gentleman with a low opinion of our predecessors at the castle did mind. He minded an awful lot. So much so that his objections precipitated a sequence of events that we were to call, privately at least, the Gate. Well, you have to, don't you? Make fun of the existential crises that you are confronted with, I mean. This was one such, one that would unwind over the next few years and which would colour, restrain and confound our progress at Dunans despite our best efforts to ignore it, and then reluctantly to engage with it. The gate was erected in the autumn of the year before we bought Dunans. A padlock was affixed to a chain which looped around the closing post. All parties with rights of access thereto were forwarded keys. The padlock was neither expensive, nor large, or particularly vandal-proof, nor was the chain. The arrangement was, as with the gate, deeply ordinary, and provided a signal to any would-be adventurers to adventure elsewhere. This principle was seemingly agreed by all parties prior. Indeed, epistolary acknowledgments and thanks were received by all those with rights to cross the bridge and use the drive. A month or two later, even as we arrived at Dunans with postcrete, CLS, handsaws, clockwork drills and drivers, and assorted fixings, George received an epistolary retraction from our neighbour, saying that if he had known the restriction the gate, chain and padlock would create to his access of his property, he would never have agreed to the erection of the self-same. George was of the opinion that our neighbour had driven the several hours from his residence to Dunans to find he had forgotten his key. George advised us to ignore this missive and carry on, particularly as we had now, or were about to, take possession of our new property, and the gate would be unlocked given that the site would be occupied for the first time in nearly 2 years. In this, our solicitor's advice was too optimistic, but discussion of what happened next in the Gate saga I shall leave for other, later, more incendiary admonitions. And yes, I am baiting you, dear reader, enjoining you subliminally to turn each page more rapidly, to read on with attention and anticipation.